This week I'm going to show you how to paint this pretty rose in this cute little jar with easy to follow steps. So welcome to the Wonders of Watercolour. So this week we are painting this rose in a glass and we're just using a handful of colours here as you can see, and I've done a few swatches so that I have a rough idea of how I want my palette to look. All the materials that I'm pointing to in this tutorial I'm going to be listing in the description box underneath this video, but as I always say, just use the materials that you have. So I'm going to start out by mixing a yellow colour with a little bit of blue to make a really nice vibrant green tone. So I've got yellow with a bit more blue in each one so that I'm varying the colour as I mix it up. I'm adding a little bit more blue to this one here, and this time I'm adding a buff titanium, which is a nice kind of creamy colour, and I'm applying this to where I see that little bit of a highlight on the leaf. As you can see, I've already done the outline of my drawing here, and if you don't like drawing, don't worry, we provide you with a reference photograph and an outline, and I'll tell you later on in this video how you can have access to those for completely free. You'll notice now that I'm adding the other colours around this highlight. All you need to do at this point is vary your green tones, and I'm applying it straight onto the watercolour paper with my number 8 size round brush. This particular brush has a really fine point and is great for finer detail as well as bigger washes. I'm adding this colour to the stem as you can see me doing here. Notice how light the colour is at this point. Now if you're new to watercolour painting, you can still join in with this tutorial because we have a learn to paint as you paint method. What that means is as you're painting, you are picking up all these tips and tricks as you go through, and it doesn't matter whether you're a beginner or whether you're even a little bit more advanced, you can still join in with us here. Watercolour is all about building up your layers, and it's important that you let each layer dry before applying the next. So you can see me adding the green tones to the sepal of the rose here using the tip of my brush. And it doesn't matter too much the kind of colour that I'm using, but I am putting more of a yellowy tone on the stem just to make it look slightly different from the leaves. You'll notice that it's very, very light at the moment, but as we build up our layers, we can enhance these colours as we work through. I'm dropping in a tiny bit of that darker green here. This is charging the colour with a darker value, and this is done when the paint is damp. This gives a lovely blurred edge. The next colour that I'm mixing up is a tiny bit of Jane's Grey. All the colours that I'm using today, by the way, are by Daniel Smith, and the paper that I've chosen to use is by Arches. But as I said, you can use whichever colours that you have. You don't have to go out and buy the colours that I'm using. I've mixed up a thicker mix here of the Jane's Grey, and I'm using it straight onto the watercolour paper using the tip of my brush to outline some of the curves on the glass. Cleaning my brush, patting it dry, and with that damp brush I'm just using it to smudge that colour to make it look a little bit softer. Just working around the glass like this, you can see how that tip of the brush can pull out that colour, adding a tiny bit of green to the outside edge there and working it around. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a bloom happening on the top of my leaf there, but it doesn't matter, we can disguise that later. A little bit of green on the lip there, and now this is all dry, we can start to build up our colours. I'm adding a bit more blue to the green to make it a bit more vibrant, and now that that first wash is dry, we can add a bit more of that darker colour as you can see me doing here. Using a little bit of that darker colour to add some detail to the sepal like this, using the tip of my number 8 brush. And blending it through. Notice how I'm blending this colour in. I'm now dropping in that darker green tone to where I've applied that light paint. You can see once again that it's charging that colour with that darker tone. Dropping it in using the tip of my brush. Now that the first wash is dry, picking up a darker green mix here and working around that top bloom. You can see that it's covered it up quite nicely, so no stress here, and blending it in. Always use a damp brush to blend your colours together, and this time we're leaving a little bit of a negative space to create that vein. This time I'm mixing a tiny bit of, this is Quinacridone Rose, and we're going to be dropping that in to the damp paint in a moment after I've taken that green colour to the stem. Just dropping it in and let that do the hard work for you. It's blurring into that damp paint, making it look really, really pretty. At the start of this video, I mentioned that you can have free access to an outline and a reference photograph, and it's really, really easy. All you need to do is watch this video right until the end, where I will put both of them up, and you can just pause the video, screenshot it and print it out that way. We do also have another way that you can obtain them by joining our Facebook group. We are a fantastic community where you can have access to all of our outlines that accompany our tutorials here on YouTube. And all you need to do is click through in the description box underneath this video and join us there. And you can also post up your works in progress as well as your finished paintings. So back to the painting in hand. We are now dry on our first layer, so we're mixing up some more of these colours. We have Buff Titanium with a tiny bit of that Quinacridone Rose in different measures. You need to just vary the ratio of Quinacridone Rose to Buff Titanium. You can have this lovely soft muted pink tone, and I'm applying this to the top of the rose like this. Just dropping in a little bit more of that Quinacridone Rose, and you can see it's just blurring onto the area that I've applied that paint. Again, using the tip of my brush. Letting it naturally blur into the damp paint. This time I'm working wet and wet. This means that you apply the water just where you want to drop in that paint. Let it sink into the paper for a little moment or two. You don't want it to be too wet. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm adding that slightly more muted pink tone to this adjoining petal. Cleaning my brush and blending that through. Now that the water has had a minute or two to settle, I'm dropping in some of that beautiful rose colour, and you can see that it's blurring into that damp paint. I'm not adding this all over, I'm just dropping it in where I feel I need to add that colour. This is called Wet and Wet, and it's a great way of giving your paint a nice blurry look. Now, if you are new here, we do launch brand new tutorials every single Tuesday. So if you like this kind of painting, you may want to consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that little bell notification so that you'll be notified every time I upload a new episode and you won't miss out on anything. And if you are enjoying this video, could you please hit that like button? It's a way of letting YouTube know that you're enjoying my content, and it means that more people can see it, and I'd really appreciate your support. So we're taking this muted pink tone, which is, to remind you, Buff Titanium and Quinacridone Rose, to this lovely kind of creamy milky consistency, and I've added a smidgen of ultramarine blue to that just to give it a tiny bit of a bluey tone. I've added that to the outside edge and then blurring the rest of it in with the original colour. This is a mixture of Buff Titanium and the Quinacridone Rose, and I'm adding this to the darker values to the top here. Make sure that your adjoining petals are dry though, you don't want this to be bleeding into that damp paint at this stage. Once again, blending it through. If you do enjoy watercolour and you are particularly fond of botanicals, just to let you know that we do have a Patreon where we upload brand new full-length tutorials every single month. You won't find them here on YouTube, they are exclusive to my Patreon, so they are in much more detail and a much slower pace without those pesky ads. We even have a mentorship and coaching level, so in case that is of interest to you, let's just take a look. Are you an aspiring artist looking to take your skills to the next level? Or perhaps you're looking for fresh inspiration? Then you may want to consider joining our Patreon. Our Patreon tutorials have much more in-depth instructions and are a much slower pace, and depending on the membership level you choose, you can have personalised feedback from me and video calls. Unlike our YouTube tutorials, our Patreon art classes focus on really learning the art of botanical painting, and I will guide you step by step through the technique and skills you will need to learn and improve your botanical art. All of our Patreon tutorials are exclusive to my patrons and you won't find them on YouTube. So why not join up to our Patreon and start creating botanical art you can be truly proud of. So with Patreon you can leave or join at any time. Do check it out, I'll link it in the description box underneath this video. So back to the glass. This time we're mixing up the Jane's Grey. So a tiny bit of a green mix that we mixed earlier on, this time adding a lighter wash to some of the areas that are looking a little bit light. So this is just the Jane's Grey with a tiny bit of green that we've mixed up. And taking this light grey all over, and I've mixed a tiny bit of grey at the top with a tiny bit of yellow added, just to give it a little bit more of a greeny hue. And I'm using this darker value with the tip of my number 8 brush just to enhance some of the curves that you can see shining on the glass. Just outlining the glass like this with the tip of my brush. The paint at this point is slightly thicker. So just outlining where you feel it necessary. Just enhances some of that grey colour. If you're wondering about Jane's Grey, by the way, it's Daniel Smith's version of Payne's Grey. I think it's a tiny bit more bluey, but if you've got Payne's Grey or any grey tone, that will work just as well. You don't have to use Daniel Smith's paints. So we're back to mixing these muted tones again. So back to the beautiful buff titanium with a little bit of that blue and a little bit of that pink, same colours as before, and adding more pink to that middle section. And we want the pink on its own. So everything is completely dry at this point, so you want to build up your colours, enhancing those little tiny folds at the top of the rose. Now, I have simplified this just for this tutorial. Here on the Wonders of Watercolour, we're all about making life a little bit easier for you, so we've taken out some of that detail just to help you paint this beautiful rose with ease. We don't want to put all the detail in this. It's just about having fun with watercolour and creating a painting that you can be proud of without all the stress. So just taking that rose colour and adding it to the tip there, mixing a tiny bit more blue, tiny bit more rose, and taking this kind of purpley tone to the underside of this petal just to create a tiny bit of shadow. Once again, blending it in with that damp brush and dropping it in as you can see me doing here. Now, if you do like this brush, by the way, stay tuned to my channel. We have some exciting news about these brushes coming shortly, so just stay tuned and I can disclose a little bit more information later on. But in case you are interested, I will put a link in the description box so that you can click on that and it'll tell you a little bit more information. I'm excited about these brushes and I can't wait to tell you more. But in case you're interested, click through to that link and you can see what I'm talking about. Adding a little bit more detail here and there. I'm sort of mixing, dipping in and out of these pink tones. I'm not being too fussy. The idea being that we just create a little bit of contrast. The paint that you can see me adding there is just the beautiful quinacridone rose on its own. I'm just going over that first wash now to give a bit more depth of colour. Blending it in with my brush as usual. cleaning my brush, patting it dry and then blending like this. Mixing up some of that green, just dropping a tiny bit of that green tone on the bottom there. So now that these sepals are dry on this little bud, I'm going over it wet on dry just to brighten up that colour a little bit. So we just have the Hansa yellow with ultramarine blue, and once again glazing over that colour like this and adding a tiny bit of the quinacridone rose to the base. Same on the other side, and dropping it in on the base there, just to make it look as if we've got a reflection of those plant stems coming through the glass like this. Once again, this is wet on dry. The first layers have now dry, so I'm just adding a bit of detail again with the tip of my brush, and this is just the Hansa yellow with a tiny bit of that beautiful quinacridone rose, and just dropping in some of that colour there and outlining the stem just to tidy it up a little bit, and using the quinacridone rose on the bud just to add a tiny bit of detail. Once again, dropping in more of that quinacridone rose. And all we're doing here is just brightening up some of the colours. You can use a damp brush to merge the colours together if you find that you get a hard edge. Sometimes when watercolour dries you can get this kind of untidy edge, so just use a damp brush to get rid of that. We're back to mixing up some more greens, so we've got that beautiful Hansa yellow with beautiful ultramarine and just a tiny bit of the quinacridone rose with green tone, and I've mixed them together. This time using my number 3 size brush to just add a bit of detail to the sepals here. I'm outlining them with this brush. It's got a super fine point, and notice the control that I have. Again, if you want to know more information about these brushes, stay tuned to my channel, more news to follow. Use any fine brush that you have though in the meantime to outline any details. This time the paint is slightly thicker of course, so that will help you build up and control your colours better. Notice how I'm blending out that colour. I'm adding a bit of detail to the stem here, just randomly picking up the colours that I have on my palette. So the colours that I've got mixed are a blue and a yellow, my quinacridone rose, and quinacridone rose is added to the green tone there to give it a kind of browny hue. I'm taking the browny colour to the underside of the leaf here and outlining some of the veins. You'll notice from the photograph, which I will put up at the end of the video here, that it has kind of got this purpley browny tone to it. So I like the idea of merging these colours together, and it does make it look a lot more uniform. Going back to the darker green tone and outlining some of the petals, some of the veins, as you can see me doing here. And I'll just continue the process until the painting is finished. Stay right until the end of this video. I'm going to stop talking now and let you watch the rest of this video in peace. Stay until the end of this video where I will put up the reference photograph, the line drawing, and of course you can take a moment to appreciate the finished painting. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give me a big thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video, and I'll say thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.